He said, I love you every single day, every morning, sometimes twice, at the end of phone calls, written in cards on every occasion, and on no occasion at all, said quietly before sleep. He never missed a day in 14 years. And she still felt completely alone. That is what this episode is about. Not about men who are cruel, not about men who cheat or lie or disappear, about something harder to name and in some ways harder to leave. A man who loved you loudly with words and almost nowhere else. There is a woman I know named Carol. She is 61 years old. She was married for 14 years to a man named David. He was not a bad man. He did not raise his voice. He did not have affairs. He told her he loved her every single day of their marriage, in the morning, in texts, in the small handwritten notes he left on the kitchen counter. He said it on the day she was diagnosed with a condition that required surgery. He said it when he told her he had already made plans that weekend and couldn't come to the hospital with her. He said it when her mother died, standing at the door of the bedroom with his coat already on because he had somewhere to be. He said it so often and with such apparent sincerity that it took Carol 11 years to understand that what he was giving her was the word, not the thing. I love you, in David's language, meant I feel warmly toward you. It did not mean I will inconvenience myself for you. It did not mean your pain takes priority over my comfort. It did not mean when something is hard, I will be there. He loved her the way some people love a place, fondly, from a distance, without any real intention to change their life around it. Carol told me she spent years trying to figure out what was wrong with her. Not because David was unkind, because he was so consistently kind in the small surface ways that she had no language for what was missing. He complimented her. He remembered anniversaries. He bought her things she mentioned wanting. He said, I love you so much and so often that when she tried to explain to a friend that something was wrong, she couldn't finish the sentence without feeling ungrateful. She said, I would try to describe it to someone and they would say, but he sounds lovely. And I would think, yes, that is exactly the problem. He sounds lovely. He says all the lovely things. And I cannot explain why I cry in the car on the way home from dinner with him. I have heard this from women more times than I can count. The inability to name a problem that has no obvious villain. The loneliness of being in a relationship that looks, from the outside, like exactly what you were supposed to want. The word for what Carol was experiencing is emotional unavailability. But that phrase does not quite capture it because David was not cold. He was warm. He was verbally affectionate. He just could not translate that warmth into actual presence when presence cost him something. There is a distinction I want to draw carefully here because I think it matters. There is a difference between a man who loves you and cannot always show it, who struggles to express himself, who finds emotion difficult, who is trying in the ways available to him, and a man who uses the performance of love as a substitute for it. David was the second kind. He had the language of love completely fluent. He could say, I love you with total conviction. What he could not do, what he consistently did not do, was love Carol in the ways that required something from him. When she needed him to sit with her through something frightening, he found a reason to be elsewhere. When she needed a decision to be made jointly, he deferred until she made it herself and then agreed. When she was struggling with grief, with health, with the ordinary weight of a life, he expressed sympathy and then continued as normal. Carol said, the thing I kept noticing was that nothing ever interrupted his life. I was married to him for 14 years, and not once did something happening to me actually interrupt his life. He would acknowledge it, he would say the right things, and then his life would continue exactly as it had been. That observation, nothing ever interrupted his life, is one of the most precise descriptions of this particular kind of unavailability I have heard. Because love, real love, is interruptive. It changes your plans. It costs you something. It requires you to be present in ways that are inconvenient, uncomfortable, and sometimes painful. And David had found a way to perform all the signs of love while exempting himself from every one of its costs. Carol stayed for 14 years. I do not say that as a judgment. I say it because I think it is important to understand why. She stayed because he never gave her a clear reason to leave. There was no affair to point to, no cruelty, no incident, just a slow, accumulating deficit that she kept trying to explain away. She told herself, he shows love differently. She told herself, this is just who he is. She told herself, perhaps I am asking for too much. Perhaps the problem is my expectations. Perhaps love is not meant to feel like this immediate, this present, this inconveniencing, and I have simply been reading too many novels. She made herself smaller to fit the love that was available. She stopped bringing certain things to him because she knew they wouldn't land. She started handling things alone, not because she preferred it, but because the alternative, handling them with someone who was technically there but practically absent, was more exhausting than doing it herself. And she told herself that was fine. She told herself that was what long marriages looked like. That the grand passion became something quieter, something more companionable, something that did not ask so much of each other. But there's a difference between love that becomes quieter and love that becomes hollow. And Carol, at a certain point, could no longer pretend she did not know which one she had. The moment she told me about came 8 years into the marriage. She had received some difficult news about a health test. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough to require follow-up appointments, a change in routine, a period of real uncertainty. She called David from the car park outside the clinic. He answered. She told him. There was a pause. He said, I love you. I'm sure it's going to be okay. And then he said he was in the middle of something, and could they talk properly that evening? She sat in the car park for 40 minutes. She did not call him back. She called her sister. And somewhere in those 40 minutes, she said she understood something she had been refusing to understand for 8 years. That the words, I love you, in David's mouth were not a promise. They were a conclusion. A full stop. The thing he said to indicate that he had registered what you told him and was now moving on. She said, I realized I had been mistaking the word for the thing for 8 years. That every time he said it, I had been reassured. And every time I needed him and he wasn't there, I explained it away. But sitting in that car park, I thought, what does it actually mean? What does it mean when someone says, I love you, and then goes back to what they were doing? What is the word worth if it costs nothing to say it and requires nothing to follow from it? She did not leave that day. She stayed for 6 more years. But something shifted. She stopped being reassured by the word. She started watching what he did instead. And what she saw, once she was really watching, was a man who had never once prioritized her comfort over his own, who had never in a decade and more of marriage made a significant sacrifice for her without making her aware of what it had cost him, who loved her genuinely and in his way she believes that, but who could not love her in the ways that she actually needed to be loved. I want to say something about what this does to a woman over time. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from being with someone who is verbally present and practically absent, because you are never quite sure what you are experiencing. The words keep coming. I love you. You are everything to me. I don't know what I would do without you. And you keep hearing them. And some part of you keeps being moved by them, even as another part of you is slowly learning not to believe them. You become suspicious of your own feelings. You start to wonder if your needs are unreasonable. You have no clear evidence of neglect. He is saying all the right things, so the deficit you feel must be yours. Must be something in you that cannot be satisfied. Must be a problem with what you want rather than a problem with what you are receiving. Carol said, the most damaging thing about those 14 years was not the loneliness. The loneliness I could have named and dealt with. The most damaging thing was that I spent 14 years being taught that my needs were excessive, that I was asking for something beyond what love could reasonably provide, that the problem was my expectations, not his availability. She came out of that marriage convinced at some deep and not quite conscious level that she was too much to love properly. It took her 3 years on her own, 3 years of therapy, of solitude, of slowly rebuilding her sense of what was real, to understand that she was not too much. She had simply been with someone who gave too little, and he had been giving it so prettily, so verbally, so warmly, that she had spent 14 years blaming herself for the gap. There is something else I want to name because I think it often goes unsaid. When you are in this kind of relationship where the words are constant and the presence is not, you often become very good at pretending. Not deliberately, not cynically, but out of a kind of survival instinct. You learn to receive the words gracefully. You learn to say thank you when he says, I love you. To smile at the notes on the counter, to not flinch at the tenderness that costs him nothing. Because the alternative, showing that the words are no longer enough, that you have started to see through them, feels like an accusation you cannot quite justify. He hasn't done anything wrong, not anything you can point to clearly. So you keep the pretending going. And over time, the pretending becomes its own kind of loneliness, because now you are not only alone inside the relationship, you are also performing not alone. You are managing his feelings about how things are, while yours go entirely unmanaged. Carol said, I became a very good actress. I knew exactly how to respond when he said, I love you, so that he felt the exchange was complete. And I did it so well, for so long, that I sometimes lost track of what I actually felt. I was so busy managing the performance that I forgot to check in with myself. That is what years of this can do. It does not just leave you lonely. It disconnects you from your own experience. You stop trusting your own read on things. You stop knowing what you feel, because the feelings you were allowed to express and the feelings you actually had became two different things so long ago that you can no longer find the seam between them. I want to be precise about what I am not saying. I am not saying that words do not matter. They do. Being told you are loved is not nothing. The absence of it costs something too. And I am not saying that every man who struggles to show love in action is performing it cynically. Some people genuinely do not know how. Some people love deeply and express it poorly. Some relationships have gaps that can be named and worked on with effort and honesty and time. What Carol had was different. David knew how to show up when it cost him nothing. He consistently chose not to show up when it did. That is not a gap in expression. That is a decision made again and again about whose comfort matters most. The words were real. The feeling behind them, in his way, was probably real. But love that never inconveniences you is not love in the form that another person can actually use. It is love as a feeling you carry around inside yourself. And that is a very different thing from love as a practice. Love as something you do repeatedly in the moments when it is difficult, when it costs you, when you would honestly rather not. Carol is 59 now. She has been out of the marriage for 2 years. She is not in a relationship. She says she is not ready, and that readiness feels like a thing she is approaching from a distance, not running toward, but not running away from either. She said something to me recently that I have been thinking about ever since. She said, I know what I am looking for now, and it is very simple. I am looking for someone whose actions and words are the same size. Not grand gestures, not constant declarations, just the same size. When you say you will be there, you are there. When you say this matters to me, it shows. When you say I love you, there is something behind it that I can actually hold on to. That is not too much to ask. It is, in fact, the minimum. And the fact that Carol spent 14 years believing it was too much is the thing that breaks my heart most about her story. If you are somewhere in your own version of this, in a relationship where the words are warm and the reality is cold, where you have spent years trying to explain to yourself why the gap exists, where you have blamed your own expectations more times than you can count, I want to say this to you directly. The gap is real. Your needs are not excessive. A love that never inconveniences the person who claims to feel it is not the full thing. And you are allowed to name that even when the words keep coming and everything looks from the outside like it should be enough. You are not too much. You have simply been measuring love by the wrong instrument. Not by what is said, by what is done, when it costs something, when no one is watching, when there is no one to applaud the sacrifice. That is the instrument. That is always the instrument. My name is Patricia Hayes. This is Patricia's Porch, where I believe the most honest conversations are the most useful ones. If this reached you today, share it with a woman who needs to hear it. And subscribe below, because I am here every week, and I would love to keep this conversation going with you. Thank you for sitting with me. I will see you next time.